Hello, my name is Nicole Carter, and I am Kayla Stowe's mother.
Where are you from?
Chicago,
Which neighborhood do you reside in?
Bronzeville,
How long have you lived in Chicago?
39 years.
What role do you play in your community?
Um, well, I would say that the role that I play is raising a child who will become a productive member of society.
Okay, follow up. What is your definition of a community?
Well, the community can be your household, it can be the neighborhood you live in. Your community could be just your family in general.
How have you been impacted by your community?
Um, I would say I've been impacted by my community. Well, if you think of it as far as my neighborhood, I would say some of the violence that we have around here has impacted me in a sense where I'm always concerned about my child's well-being. If you want to use the definition of just being the family, that they have really, they help me support Kayla, they support me, so I can kind of navigate through my life.
Okay. How would your life be? How would your life be different if you lived in a different city or town?
Well, if I was able to live in a different city or town, I would probably try to live somewhere that I didn't necessarily have to worry about as much violence. I would probably choose somewhere that was more cost efficient because I feel like Chicago is it's expensive to live here.
Okay. If you could change anything about your community, what would it be and why?
Um, if there was anything I could change, I would say I would change. I would somehow try to figure out how to change the violence in it. I think the way we could do that is probably have like different like programs for kids to do on their off time, weekend, summer breaks. And the reason why is because kids would have something to do and they could put all their energy into something productive versus something negative.
How do you think your community is viewed by others?
Well, Bronzeville's like becoming this elite place to stay. 20 years ago, you couldn't pay anybody to come over here. But I think people look at this as an up and coming area where more and more affluent African Americans would be.
Why do you believe that is?
Um, well, because what they've done around here is they have they've tore down a lot of the projects, and they have built up new buildings. They've made, they're starting to build up the neighborhood in a sense where it's a lot more grocery stores. So they're making it accessible for people who work closer to downtown so they can have somewhere that's not as expensive as downtown or north, but they could still be around, still be close to their jobs.
If you think this view is wrong or unfair, is there a way to change how your community is viewed by others?
I don't think it's wrong for it to be viewed as an up and coming neighborhood. I don't. What the issue I have is that now that it's labeled up and coming. It's just too hard for people who have been here for so long to stay here because the rents are increasing. And a lot of people who live in this area, they can't afford the rent, so they have to move further south, which in certain areas further south, there is more violence.
All cities have to deal with issues like violence. How does the issue of violence in Chicago compare to other major cities?
Well, I think it's highlighted more so in Chicago versus in other cities. I believe all cities have pockets where you go and it's like, don't go over there because you're going to end up dead, or, you can be hurt, or you can get caught in crossfires. But for some reason, it's just, I don't know if it's because we're a major city, but we are just on the news all the time as if it's all this just. So I just think that we don't differ from other cities. It's just that Chicago is just for some reason on the news a lot for their violence. So now it's become a thing where it's like, oh, Chicago is just known. It's just riddled with violence. You can't go anywhere without being killed.
Okay. What are the top 3 issues or concerns that you would like to address and start a dialogue with your community? Your community could be your peers, your neighborhood, Chicago, etc.
3 issues. Oh, healthcare. The violence. I'm not even say the violence, but just more outlets for kids during the after school summer for them to kind of release stress. And another one is, when I say health, let me go back. I'm sorry. When I say health, mental health programs for teens, children and teens, and the third one is housing, because I feel like if you've been here for 39 years or however long, you should be able, if you don't want to move, you should be able to live in an area where you don't have to worry about being shot. Like, it shouldn't have to be because you make this amount of money that you have to stay over here when you've been in your home for, up to years.
If you were in charge of the media, what would you show or what would you do to change the perception of how people view you and your community?
I would tell, like, what happened, of course. Like, if we do have, different acts of violence or just different things that happen. But I would also show Chicago in a positive light. Like, in communities that are, quote unquote, riddled with violence, there are good things happening. And unfortunately, we don't see that. So I would focus more on what the good that's happening in those communities versus just showing, oh, well, if you go over in Inglewood today, it was a 15-year-old that was shot and killed. Because if you keep replaying that, people are never going to see the good that a particular community is trying to accomplish.
How do you see Chicago in the future?
I don't know. This is a hard question because I feel like it's going to be, I do feel like it's going to be even more segregated than it already is. Where I'm staying now, I don't think it's going to be more Caucasian people here, unfortunately. And a lot of us are going to be pushed out to different communities. And, I don't know. I don't see it being the place that you would want to raise children.
Do you think this can be prevented?
Is this a good thing or a bad thing? I think that it is a bad thing.
Can this do you think this can be prevented?
Yes, it can.
How?
Well, I don't know. I feel like one thing is not to continue to raise, I would say, rent prices. Because a lot of times the reason why people have to move is because, they can't afford their rent. It's like if I'm living here for whatever reason I can't get a house, or I think I can't afford a house, or I get an apartment. The 2-bedroom apartments in this area, between $1,500 and $1,600. Average people cannot afford that.
It is important for us to keep an ongoing dialogue of the most important issues facing our community. Are there any other questions that I did not ask you that you feel I should ask others in your community? Would you like to use your questions in the next interview?
I don't have any more questions.
Okay. Any additional notes, comments about this process, about the experience? What can we do to improve this process with future interviewees? What was successful or what needs work?
I think it was fine. I think it should be more questions as far as like you should ask about like the housing. You should ask like if these people, like how many kids do you have in your house? They can give a different understanding of how it's affecting not just adults in the community, but also the children. And you can integrate questions like, do you feel like it's, do your kid, are there a lot of programs for your kids and things like that? So maybe you can get kind of in depth into why people feel the way they do about their community.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.